Welcome to Podnutz Daily for September 29th, 2008, episode number 87. Dell Dimension desktop. Most popular desktop I get. Dell Dimension. And here's what happened. She brought it in for viruses. And it was running Trend Micro. Trend Micro Security Suite. Let's see. Anyway, I think it was just spyware and viruses. I did my normal cleanup procedure, cleaned it up. And here's something we did actually a little different on this one. A lot of times you can't do stuff in safe mode. You can only do stuff in normal mode. Well, if you know you're going to be working in normal mode on a really messed up machine, just go into MS-config, turn off all startup items, and turn off all non-Microsoft services. Then boot up into normal mode. It'll run a lot faster for you. There still might be some spyware that's visible, but at least you can operate without, going crazy. At least, the system's not bogged down, or all these procedures aren't trying to run. So do that, and then you can go into normal mode. So we did that. We worked in normal mode, clean up all kinds of stuff, got it all ready, and then we got it on the rack to leave. And customer came, picked it up, and she brought it home. She called me the next day and said, everything's running good, except I can't use my printer, and the CD drives don't work anymore. So I'm like, the CD drives don't work. I'm thinking to myself, it must not have turned on a service in MS-config that might have been causing that. I don't know any other reason why it wouldn't work. Well, anyway, I logged into her computer remotely instead of her having to, lug it all back. And I took a look into my computer, and the CD drives weren't even visible in my computer. I go into the device manager. CD drives aren't even in the device manager. So I'm thinking at this point, if they're not in a device manager, or not in my computer, it's got to be like a cable problem. Maybe they're not hooked up. Maybe we just forgot to connect the cables back up. But I was trying to figure out why we would disconnect the cables in the first place. Anyway, she was nice enough to bring the computer back. And I opened up the computer. It's one of those Dells, the tall tower Dells, like an 8100 or one of those big ones, where they open up. The side doesn't come off. They open up like I don't know. They kind of slide apart. The two sides slide apart and open up, and that's how you work on them. Well, when we were in there and we pulled the two sides apart, it must have pulled the cable out of the CD drive. Or when I was in there with the leaf blower blowing all the dust out of it, which is how we clean the computers now, maybe it popped the cable off of the motherboard for the CD drive. Anyway, I hate those Dells that come apart like that. First of all, they're too heavy, they're too big, and they don't come apart enough for you to actually be able to get in there and work easily. So aside from me hating that, the cable was disconnected. So I connected the cable up to the motherboard, made sure it was tightly connected to the CD drives, closed it back up, powered it on. I'm like, that's got to fix the problem. Powered it on, still same problem. No CD drives under my computer. So wasn't sure what was happening at this point. So I looked into the services, and I looked into MS-config for the startup item and services. I realized that, and I don't know if it was me or my dad that did this, I didn't turn all the services on that I had turned off in the first place to work in normal mode. All the services were non-Microsoft services were off, and all the startup items were off. If you do that, the computer looks like it's running great, but a lot of things that the customer wants to do, they can't do anymore. Like their printer, that's why the printer wasn't working. The services for the printer were off. So turned on all the necessary things. Said, all right, well, that must be it. That must fix the problem. Rebooted the computer. Still no CD drives visible in MS-config or in my computer. Also, no CD drives visible in Device Manager. Finally narrowed it. I went to the BIOS to see if the BIOS recognized it. Maybe it's just a Windows problem. Went into the BIOS. The BIOS did not even recognize the drives. And what had happened was that the secondary master and slave channel, which is where I had the CD drives, were set to off instead of set to auto detect. I turned on auto detect. It found the drives. Everything was fine after that. So that's what it was. It was after I plugged in the cable back in. The BIOS must have turned itself off when the cable came out. I put the cable back in. The BIOS was still set for off. Turned that secondary channel on, and it found both drives, so everything was fine. CD and DVD drive. Everything was fine after that. By the way, she was running Trend Micro. And this is the second time I've had experience with this. Trend Micro just goes wacko and just maxes out the CPU at 99 nonstop. That happened on this computer. I took off Trend Micro. I put on ABG. Everything's fine. Had an Acer desktop come in with a bad motherboard. How do I know it was a bad motherboard? Hit the power button and nothing happened. Well, one might think that that's the power supply. So we pulled the side off the computer. With the power all plugged in, you look at the motherboard and you see if there's an LED that lights up on the motherboard. Usually motherboards have LEDs. When you see that if the LED is lit on the motherboard and you're pressing the power button and you're still not getting any power, usually that means your motherboard's bad, not the power supply. But, I bought my Dr. Power power supply tester from Thermal Take, plugged that in, and I saw that the power supply was actually good, and then I knew it was the motherboard. So it had a AMD Athlon 64 X2, I think it was, dual-core processor. So I'm right off the bat, I'm like, oh, it's got to be a socket AM2. And this has happened to me so many times, I got to learn my lesson. So I went out and bought an AM2 motherboard to replace it, and it's a socket 939. Hate when that happens. Now I got to go tomorrow and buy a socket 939. But by the way, I got a socket AM2 motherboard at Micro Center for like $45. You could probably buy them online for that price too. You can't beat it, man. Brand new AM2 socket. Plus they're selling like Sempron processors for like $30 too. So you get like for $40, $45 for the motherboard, $40 for the processor. You got a motherboard processor combo for like $80. Let's see what else we got here. Gave a customer back a laptop I did some work on, and this was a laptop he used for work. So the way it was set up was Windows Professional on a domain. So when he took it home, he didn't log in on his domain. He logged in using that computer. And when he used that computer, when now in the startup menu it says this computer, it says this computer, and he didn't pick that instead of his domain. None of his document folders were there. None of his programs were there. He called up and he goes, "Did you guys erase my hard drive?" And it's no. When that happens, it's like he's got to log in under his domain, and then he will see all of his stuff. That's something I'm very not familiar with. All servers, the way they work with domains, and what's recognizable, and I'm lost in that. I've never had to deal with that really. That's why I'm going to have Keith Albright on from Mind of Root. He's going to be not the next Podnutz guest. He's probably going to be the one after that. We're going to talk about being a system administrator. Okay, a couple of things real quick. In the chat room, the Podnutz Lounge, it's basically the Ustream chat room now. I changed it. But from the lounge, you can't actually type in your nickname unless you log into how would you do it? No, you'd have to log into Ustream and then go over to the lounge. But thanks to Sax, who was in the lounge I saw earlier today,